We are continuing to talk about listening to understand. And the next question you probably have is, all right, I'm listening to understand. What am I trying to understand? You're trying to understand three things. Number one, you're trying to understand what the world looks like to the other person. Number two, you're trying to understand what their emotional reaction to that worldview is. And then lastly, you're trying to figure out, what do they want from you? Why are they talking to you? So the first thing we're trying to understand is how the other person is perceiving the world. Going back to this cartoon, these two men are seeing the world in a very different way. The first thing you really want to understand about another person when you're trying to connect to them is just, what does the world look like to you? Just describe what the world looks like to you. Then they have a reaction to whatever that worldview is. So they see the world in a certain way, and then they have an emotional reaction to that worldview. So we got this cartoon where this guy's stuck on an island and he sees a boat and he's having this emotional reaction of like, oh, thank God I get to get off this island. And then the guy on the boat is looking at the guy on the island and saying, oh, thank God I get to get off this boat, which I know is a stupid comic, but it gets the point across very well that we often see the same. We often have very different emotional reactions to this from other people to the same situation. So first of all, we might not see the world in the same way that they do, but even if we see the world in the same way, we might react very differently to that perception. And the last thing that you want to understand when you're talking to someone is, what do they want from you? Why are they talking to you? What do they hope to get out of this conversation or this interaction? Usually there are three things that people want from us. They want us to provide empathy to validate their emotions and their perspective of the world. They want us to give them advice about what they should do, or they want to give us feedback. They want us to change our behavior in some way, and they're talking to us to try and get us to stop doing something that's bothering them or to do more of something that they like. The first thing that people can want from you is empathy. And honestly, this is the most common thing that people want from a listener is just empathy. And when I talk about empathy here, I'm talking about emotional connection, about being heard, about having their feelings understood and validated, and really just connecting to people with their experience of the world. That is what I mean by empathy. We build empathy through open-ended questions and restatements and minimal reinforcers, which I'll talk about later. But it's genuinely just connecting to people. Most people, more than anything, just want to be understood, just want to be heard. We have this tendency when trying to create empathy of pivoting the conversation back to ourselves. So, for example, like if I'm talking about one of my coworkers and she's really upset because her dog died, instead of being like, "Oh, that must be really hard for you," and trying to connect to her and be empathic to her through that, I might say something like, "Oh man, my dog died a few years ago, and it was such a hard process for me," and that's okay. You can sometimes use that to build empathy, but the problem is you're really risking pivoting the conversation back to you and turning it into that situation where we're not talking about one person's perspectives and opinions and views. We're really having two parallel conversations, and you don't want to do that. So you can tell those personal stories. Sometimes they can be useful to connect and build empathy, but be really careful about that. Give the other person the space that they need. Keep the conversation on them and not you. And again, you know that you are absolutely amazing at empathy when someone comes up to you and says, dude, you are such a jerk. And your response is, oh man, that must be so hard for you. That must be really hard for you to have to deal with me. That's like the top level of empathy. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I have that conversation with my girlfriend all the time. My poor girlfriend has to put up with me. I couldn't live with me. That would drive me insane. So, I have some empathy for the fact that she has to live with this like very loud, messy, and somewhat attention-seeking person. That must be really hard for her. And put your ego aside and don't be defensive and connect to other people when they're complaining about you. That is the height of empathy. The other reason people could be talking to you is because they need advice. My sister is an accountant, so I call her up every April and I'm like, hey, how should I deduct this, or what should I do with this expense, or whatever. I'm not calling her for empathy. I don't need her to go, oh, you're doing your taxes. That must be so hard for you. I need advice from her, right? I need technical knowledge of what to do. Don't ever give unsolicited advice. I stole this story from, I was either Seven Habits of Highly Effective People or How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is not my anecdote, but I'm appropriating it. So there's this anecdote of this guy is talking to one of his friends, and he's like, "Man, my vision's getting really blurry. It's difficult to see." And his friend goes, "Oh man, I used to have the exact same problem, and then I got these glasses. Try these glasses on and see if they fix your vision." And of course they don't, because they have different prescriptions, right? They're both seeing the world in a blurry way, but for different reasons. And this seems like so ridiculous, right? We'd never give someone a pair of our glasses and expect it to fix their vision. And yet we do this all the time when we give advice, right? Oh, you're struggling with your boss? This is what I did. Or, oh, your coworker is giving you a lot of attitude? This is what I would do, right? And instead of connecting to people, having empathy for what they're going through, trying to facilitate them figuring out a decision that is best for them, instead of helping them to find their glasses, we give them our glasses and expect that to fix their problem, expect that to give them clear vision, which is patently ridiculous, right? There are times when it is appropriate to give advice, absolutely, like my sister giving me tax advice, but most of the time when people are talking, they want empathy. They want to be understood. They want help in figuring out a solution. They don't want you to tell them a solution. In fact, when you give people unsolicited advice, what you're really communicating to them is that, hey, your problem is not that big a deal. Here is the solution to your problem. It is easy. It is obvious. Why are you worried? Why are you stressed out? And it ends up being really invalidating, or we end up invalidating their feelings instead of empathizing and connecting to them. So I cannot stress enough, do not ever give unsolicited advice. The next time you feel compelled to give advice, the next time you're talking to someone and you just have this, it's bursting out of your mouth like, hey, this is what I would do in that situation. This is what you should do. The next time that happens, instead, just say this. Oh man, that sounds really hard for you. Oh, that's such a struggle. I would be so stressed out if I were in that situation. And instead of trying to tell them what to do to solve it, try to connect to them emotionally. And almost always, it's a better response. If they want advice, they will ask it for you. Or if you really feel like it, you'd be like, so do you want my advice? I have I have an opinion on this if you'd like to hear it. And if they don't like your advice, if they don't take it, if they don't agree with it, that's fine. That's their decision. Listening is not about getting your opinion across. It's about connecting and hearing the other person. Okay, so we talked about people come to you for empathy. They will come to you for advice, which is rare. Usually they will come to you for empathy. And usually, even when they ask for advice, what they really want is empathy. So my default is always try and give people empathy first. But sometimes they do want advice. And then the last thing, and this is a common reason to approach someone, is that they want you to change your behavior. You're doing something that annoys them. You're doing something that bothers them. You're doing something that makes their life more difficult. Or the opposite. You're doing something they really like. You're doing something that's helping them. They want you to do more of that thing. But regardless, the last reason people approach you and talk to you is that they want you to change your behavior. Again, try to understand why. So your initial reaction might be to be defensive and be like, well, I do it this way because X, Y, Z, or because I like it. But instead of doing that, try to understand why they want you to change your behavior. Try to connect to them about that. Remember, understanding isn't agreeing. You don't have to walk away from the conversation going, okay, I'm going to do whatever you ask me to, change however you want me to change. But you at least need to understand why they feel that way, what is compelling them to make this request of you.